Here we go. Today is Sunday, February 18th, 2018. This is episode 211 of the Defensive Security Podcast. My name is Jerry Bell, and joining me tonight, as always, is Mr. Andrew Callett.
Good evening, Jerry. How are you, sir?
So good it hurts. How are you?
I'm pretty good. I know you've been crazy busy, which is why we've missed a couple of weeks here and there, and we do apologize for that.
I had terrible jet lag going to Dublin, and then I had terrible jet lag coming back. So
how was Ireland otherwise?
Ireland is absolutely beautiful. The people there are awesome. It's a really great place. I would like to be there when I'm not working, but I worked a ton. I actually didn't really have a whole lot of free time when I was there, but great place. Highly recommend it. A+. Would visit again. Yeah.
Cool.
And then speaking of travel, we're going to Bogota in a month. Can you believe it? Less than a month.
Like 2 weeks, buddy.
2 weeks. Oh, that's right. 2 weeks.
That's crazy. I should really do my talk.
Yeah. That's
I should probably work on that, huh? Tactical Edge, Bogota, Colombia.
That's right. Tacticaledge.co. Be there or be square.
Separate and unrelated keynotes, because apparently we're not allowed to do a shared keynote.
Nope.
But your keynote is all about this show, so I might have to hang out in the background and heckle.
That's right. That's right.
And so that's exciting. I'm looking forward to that trip. I've never been to South America.
Neither have I.
And all the other speakers are phenomenal. So it's sort of, I definitely have some imposter syndrome going into this show, thinking I am not worthy, but I'm going to do my best, and hopefully I won't embarrass myself too badly.
In the show, just a reminder that you're also representing the show. So.
Oh my God, the pressure.
Anyway, if you're able to go down there, it should be a good time. If not, maybe next year. So just a reminder before we get into our topics for tonight that let's try that again. The thoughts and opinions we express on the show are ours and do not represent those of our employers. And also one more call out to our Patreon donors. Thank you very much. Definitely appreciate your generosity.
Yeah, you guys are amazing. Thank you.
All right. So, it's been an interesting couple of weeks. Obviously the Olympics started, and there was a fair amount of hoopla about a cyber attack, and I still need to get some music for the cyber attack.
Dun, dun, dun.
Something ominous sounding. So there was an attack on the Olympics. It apparently was not the most devastating attack ever. It apparently did disrupt their website and ticket sales for a period of time, and also, interestingly, disrupted the Wi-Fi in the main venue for the opening ceremonies, which I thought was strange. I don't know how those two are linked, but anyway.
Hey, man, look, I'm not saying it went to the lowest bidder. But I'm saying it worked great in tests.
It did work great in tests. So what we have here is a story from Bleeping Computer. Title is Destructive Malware Wreaks Havoc at Pyeongchang 2018 Winter Olympics. And we actually have three different stories talking about three different angles of this thing. So this one describes the actual malware. I would say it's very similar in many respects to the NotPetya worm. It didn't, the payload was a little different, but in terms of the propagation, it was very similar. There's no indication yet how it actually how it was actually delivered initially. So it's not clear if it was done with a NotPetya style, software update type thing. But in terms of propagation, once it was inside the network, it was apparently very similar. It used a version of Mimikatz or something like Mimikatz. I'm guessing Windows Credential Editor to pull passwords out of LSASS, and it was trying to propagate to other hosts on the network by looking at the ARP table and leveraging WMI and PSExec and blah blah blah.
So nothing too revolutionary. I mean, pretty common stuff.
Yeah, I mean, so it kind of sounds like they may have taken, and in fact, some of the other scuttle was it much more closely resembles the Bad Rabbit malware from a couple of months back. Then that there was an attempt to make a big deal out of that, and it just really didn't ever go anywhere. But apparently, this particular malware pretty closely resembled Bad Rabbit, so it's not clear if the techniques were copied or if there was actual code copied. But
wait a second, are you saying that people can copy techniques and code, and that attribution is fuzzy?
No, that's not what I'm saying at all.
Okay.
No. So yeah. Anyway, so that kind of dovetails to the next story, which comes from Cyberscoop, and the title here is. Atos, I think it's called pronounced Atos. Atos, IT provider for Winter Olympics, hacked months before opening ceremony cyber attack. So Atos, I had never heard of them, but apparently they're a pretty large IT provider. Was the official cloud provider of the Winter Olympics.
Wait, so this is the lowest bidder?
I guess. I don't know. I mean, we don't know. Maybe it's somebody's nephew. You just don't know, right? I mean,
no, I'm not. Look, I know you're trying to get us sued here, like you usually do. They can be perfectly fine.
Yeah, absolutely. So anyway, I'm definitely not passing judgment here, but apparently what has come to pass is some enterprising security researchers found in VirusTotal a piece of malware that actually was that same Olympic destroyer code that I just described. And what I actually neglected to describe was that. So I needed to walk back a little bit here and say that there was an important difference on this particular piece of malware, that as it gathered credentials, it actually created new versions of itself with the credentials hard-coded into the new version. So basically, it would infect a host. It would try to interrogate LSASS to find clear text credentials. If it found them, it would create a new version of the binary, and then it would try to push that binary to other hosts on the network. And so now that that new infector had the benefit of those credentials that were gathered from the previous host.
If only there was a programming technique to link an external file like a DLL or something with this new information.
I know, right?
Anyway, I'm just being silly at this point.
We have the technology. So anyway, these researchers, and I'm not clear if it was Cisco Talos or somebody else, but anyway, somebody found in VirusTotal some versions of this Olympic destroyer malware hanging out with credentials hard-coded belonging to Atos. So then the next time we find or we hear about this particular piece of malware is in the context of the actual attack on the Olympics, which, by the way, I also didn't describe what the malware did. Probably should have done that, but you know what? It's Sunday and I'm tired and cranky. So
it did malware-y things.
It did malware-y things. It unlike NotPetya, it did not pretend to be a piece of ransomware. It didn't give you a Bitcoin address or anything dumb like that. It deleted volume shadow copies. It wrecked the ability to start the computer into recovery mode and kind of nuked parts of the Windows operating system and then shut it down. The idea being that once you turned your computer back on, it was basically unbootable, and they had taken some steps to make it really hard to get the system back up and running.
One could speculate this was purely to make the Olympic Committee in South Korea look bad.
Correct.
For the lulz, as they say.
Yeah. And so there's...
So, clearly that means it must be North Korea.
Obviously so.
Could it be?
Obviously so. It's
that, or Sweden.
Or Luxembourg. Yeah.
Anyway,
so yeah, that and by the way, that kind of is a good lead into the third story, which comes from bankinfosecurity.com. The title is "Attribution Games Don't Rush to Blame."
I'm going to admit I read ahead. I knew that was coming. I am trying to work on my segue skill set.
That was nice job, Mr. Kallett.
Yeah. And now, right up front, I'll admit that I rally against attribution on a regular basis. So I personally was quite happy to see this story.
Yes. So so they point out here that attribution is kind of in the eye of the beholder. So if you're South Korea, everything that comes your way originates from North Korea. And if you're the U.S. government, everything comes from either Russia or China, and so it goes. And they point out in here, by the way, that that in the past we've had kind of airtight attribution, like in the wake of the sanctions the U.S. imposed on Russia because of their actions in Ukraine. There was the big attack on J.P. Morgan Chase, and everybody was, hell bent that this was the actions of the Russians, and it actually turned out to be two Israelis and an American, who were down in Florida, running a pump and dump stock scheme.
I can see how that could be confused. I mean, that's very similar.
It's almost the same thing as the Russian government. It's almost the same thing.
I mean, you got to cut them a little slack here.
And they have a quote. They have a quote in here from Jeffrey Carr, who I really like this quote. It says, Jeffrey Carr has long cautioned that behind every attribution, there's some type of motivation: a vendor trying to sell a service, lawmakers pushing a political agenda, or a breached organization trying to deflect blame for its information security shortcomings.
I completely agree. I personally have said over and over again, as a tactical and sometimes strategic InfoSec person, I don't care about attribution. It doesn't do me any good one way or the other. I don't care if it's coming from Bob in HR or a couple Israelis in Florida or the Russian government. The problem set is still the same. And the variability of the technique and tactic is such that it doesn't matter what... I mean, okay, yes, I figure out. I positively attribute this to Canada, and I blame Canada. It doesn't mean they're not going to change their tactics. It doesn't matter to me. Now, it might matter at an executive level. It might matter at a legal level. It might matter at a law enforcement level. But to folks like what we do every day, I really don't care. And I find attribution a distraction and a waste of time.
Yeah, so I have heard some reasonable arguments in favor of it, and about the only one that really resonated with me is if you have some inkling, and by the way, I think this cuts both ways, so we'll talk about that in a second, but if you have an inkling of who's behind the attack, now you're absolutely right that you should be you should be dealing with the attack, not trying to figure out who it is. But if you know who the attacker is and you know about their other kinds of capabilities, that may lead you to heightening your your monitoring program or your defensive posture in a way that would anticipate other known tactics that adversary is known to use.
But there's no monopoly on TTPs.
I agree. I'm saying
so your defensive set should be accommodating new common TTPs regardless.
Yes.
If I got advance notice that Kuala Lumpur was coming after me,
Again.
yeah, again, and I knew how they did things, sure, like, oh, they like to do a DDoS, and then they like to go after this, and then they send phishing, then I could adapt my posture to look for those specific TTPs. But the fact of the matter is, you rarely, if ever, know that,
Right.
and the problem set is the same regardless. So attribution after the fact is really what most people do. And I get that there's a whole lot of politics around this. I get that there's a whole lot of deflecting of potential blame. Very much so right now when these massive breaches happen and we have letters from people like Kevin Mandia saying there's nothing you can do against a nation state attack. So it's in a company's best interest to say this was a nation state attack and we think so and so did it. But that's politics. That's not what we do most of the time. I'm not saying politics aren't part of our job, but I honestly believe that is a damage control issue after the fact.
No, I think you're right. And I would also say that what I was talking about before. I suspect most organizations are not at a level of maturity where it really makes sense to be focusing on that. I mean, that like we all have a lot of basics that we could be doing a whole lot better in investing in rather than trying to hone our attribution.
I agree. I think executives, senior executives and boards have kind of fetishized this idea of figuring out who did it. And I think that's a mistake.
Yeah, well, at the end of the day, you got to. Part of it's probably the popular culture, right? But you got to put yourself into the position of a CISO or a CIO. Your company's just been breached, and you're going with your hat in your hand to the CEO and the board, and what's the first thing they're gonna ask, or maybe the second thing? It's like, how bad is it, and who did it?
I get it. I get that they ask. I purely understand that. And I think we've got a whole bunch of the industry feeding it from a vendor standpoint and a consulting standpoint, feeding into that ask.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
I still don't think it's a very useful ask.
Yeah, fair enough. Fair enough. So anyway, it's completely unclear who did this, right? There's across the three articles, there's kind of an undercurrent of acceptance that it's a nation state, right? So even though all three articles talk about not jumping to conclusions, the discussion is not around was it was it a private person or it's no, which country was it? Was it North Korea, Russia, China? Who was it? I think, and we've talked about this in the past. I think, especially given that this particular piece of malware is using, very well established techniques that other pieces of malware has used in the past. This is not a complicated thing, right? You don't have to have nation state level resources to pull off
O days, right?
Yeah, this wouldn't need to be perpetrated by a country, and that's the problem.
Well, I'm gonna play my own devil's advocate. It sure as well could be a country.
It could be,
but this is what I'm saying. There's nothing unique about the techniques that we're talking about here that make it one thing or the other. Right, the bad guy, whoever the bad guy is, only has to be good enough to achieve his goals.
True.
And it could be a very basic attack, it could be a complicated attack. But none of this is outside the reach of two Israelis and a Russian guy, right?
Your average good pen tester.
Right. Or even weaker than that, because I think pen testers have a ton of skill set. But then again, we've also seen nation states do unsophisticated things. My point is, you can't tell, in my opinion, purely by the TTPs.
Yeah, I guess where I was going with my thought before I was rudely interrupted was was that the the innovation, because I think these tactics were largely initially innovated by by people like the NSA, with Eternal Blue and then WannaCry. Obviously that wasn't NSA, right? But the point is, when nation states are off innovating and then launching attacks using the tools that they've created, I think the whole concept of attribution goes out the window. I mean, it becomes immensely more complicated because now, the tools are out there, and you got a lot of smart people, and it's not hard to take these these ideas and tactics and turn them into something new that is kind of tangential to what was used before, and that's my big concern is from a kind of like the discussion about blaming Russia for the attack on J.P. Morgan. We're making an assumption that a lot of people are making an assumption that these things are highly sophisticated attacks, and in fact a lot of them are highly sophisticated, but because of the evolution of technology, that doesn't mean they're out of the reach of of a private citizen.
Right.
So anyway,
that's because we have empowered the average person with supercomputers in their home.
That's very true.
And the internet has democratized intelligence
Also
and
true.
knowledge and wisdom. And I don't know. I'll stop.
Yeah, let me know when you're done. So, anyway, enough on that. I'm sure there'll be more to say in the future as we learn more. But so moving on to our next dumpster fire, which just continues to keep giving.
The show. The weekly dumpster fire review.
Meltdown Inspector. The title here is from ZDNet. Meltdown Spectre flaws. We found new attack variants, say researchers.
Yeah, this doesn't surprise me given the low-level nature of this bug that other people will get clever with it.
Yeah, so apparently some researchers have come up with a model they can use to take in the characteristics of a CPU. So things like characteristics about the actual processing cores and the cache and whatnot. And it craps out ways to exploit the Meltdown Inspector style attacks. And so using that, they came up with what they call Meltdown Prime and Spectre Prime. And the point is not necessarily that these are radical additional techniques, but the more the point is that there's a whole class of bugs here that are relatively, now that we know they're there, they're probably going to be relatively easy to uncover, and in fact, as they pointed out here, they've got some tools that help do it automatically.
Which is an interesting common trend. Somebody gets very novel and produces original research around some new class of problem or bug, and then a whole lot of other smart people start exploring the edge cases or companion territory to that bug or nearby, and find a whole bunch of other stuff. So this is something we see as a trend when somebody finds like free after use. When that was sort of came out of the scene, suddenly a bunch of other people found free after use type bugs. So it's interesting how the research kind of follows these sorts of endeavors, and I think we'll see more of this.
Indeed. So anyhow, apparently with these particular bugs, the current software mitigations that are being released for actual Meltdown and actual Spectre apparently are relatively effective against this Meltdown Prime and Spectre Prime. But the author of the article points out that when AMD and Intel and other processor manufacturers are kind of re-engineering their processors to try to mitigate this, they probably need to be more holistic in their thinking. And this is a mess. I mean,
But I mean, to be fair, hindsight's always 20/20. It's signal in the noise. Right.
It
This
absolutely
class of
is.
problem will probably never happen again, but these chips have gotten so complex. Somebody somewhere had a ratio of lines of code to bugs, and probably there's some similar ratio of number of transistors and microcode in their dies to bugs, right? When you look at how complex these chips are, it's inevitable that they're going to have bugs like this. Maybe not exactly like this, but I mean, expecting them to be flawless is, I think, unrealistic, especially with the price points they're driving and the innovation rate they're driving. I just, I think it's unrealistic to expect them to never have a problem.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's certainly true. They are absolutely incredibly complex. And we don't have the story here, but I did see a headline earlier today that Intel currently has 32 lawsuits filed against it in relation to Meltdown and Spectre.
Yeah, uh, that'll be interesting to watch how that plays out. And most of them are class action, as I recall.
Yeah, well, I mean, you you probably are seeing the an artifact of the way the legal system here works, right?
Right.
Everybody wants to be the lawyer that leads that class, so they're all jockeying for a pole position there.
But this goes to the fundamental question that a lot of people have had over the years is why don't we hold manufacturers accountable to security bugs? And I mean, that's a broader debate than we have time to get into on this show today, but this kind of starts to talk to that in some ways.
Yeah, and I, this is a difficult thing because, um, I mean, not only has the response to this been just really unfortunate. I mean, it's. I worry, by the way, if something like this were to happen, and it were to be a much more serious vulnerability. I mean, not that these are trivial vulnerabilities, right? But they're not remote code execution type
Yeah,
bugs in all cases, right?
that's your privilege showing right there, buddy.
Well, I guess my point is if you had a let's say a shell shock style
Yeah, yeah.
bug and
Unauthenticated remote code exploit
yeah
is much nastier. Sure.
and it required this kind of coordination, holy god, we would be in bad shape as a society, not just as an industry. But back to your point, I don't know what Intel would do. I mean, like it can't be economically feasible for them to go and produce and distribute replacement chips for free and continue on as a going business. Like, I mean, I've got to believe if they were mandated to go and provide replacements, like it would be cheaper for them just to go out of business.
Yeah, I mean, I think the closest we ever saw to this was something like the Pentium math bug.
Yeah, yeah,
But that was a different time and a different impact in some
right.
ways. But they had to recall that entire line, and they made keychains out of them. Actually, I think I have one somewhere. Uh, but we're kind of getting to an interesting point. I think in computing where some of these CPUs I think last much longer in production than previous era. We've got so much power now that especially for general purpose business computing, I think the upgrade cycles have slowed down.
I certainly think they have. I mean, that definitely seems to be the case. We're just not seeing the radical, both increases in performance, but also in software. I mean, I think I think the OS manufacturers are having a hard time, slowing things down enough with each successive generation. Not that they do that intentionally, but anyway. I think we'll be talking about we'll be having meltdown stories probably this time next year. I would think so.
Yeah, I think really until we turn over the CPU architecture
Yeah,
to
which
a
which by
decent
the way,
amount.
there isn't even going to be an alternative architecture that fixes this until earliest, as I understand it, fourth quarter 2018.
Yeah, it takes time.
Yeah. So anyway, moving on to our next story, which comes from the. This is a news release from the University of Indiana, or Indiana University at Bloomington. Thought this was pretty interesting. Title here is "To Prevent Cyber Attacks, Paper Suggests Agency Similar to National Transportation Safety Board." So I thought, this one would kind of get you going a little bit. This is a paper that was.
Now you just pick articles purely to
Yeah, absolutely.
elicit reaction from me.
Yes.
So this entire show has turned to you personally trolling me.
I don't know that I would say it exactly that way.
But yes.
But yeah.
Okay.
So anyhow, a couple of smart people at this particular university put together a paper which recommends creating the National Cybersecurity Safety Board, which would follow similar in structure and mandate to the National Transportation Safety Board. And the idea would be that there would be a team of people who investigate breaches, figure out what happened, and this would be separate, as they point out in the report. It would be separate from any findings of fault. So, like in a I should say legal determinations of fault, right? It would basically try to figure out what actually happened for the purpose of trying to make the industry more secure. So it's an interesting concept. I think the problem is, and the paper's not very long. It's only, I think, 18 pages, half of which are a background on the NTSB and how they came to be, and another third compare the what they're talking about to the Columbia Investigation Board. So the actual meat of it is relatively
as
short.
In the Space Shuttle Columbia?
As in the Space Shuttle, yeah.
Okay.
And the reason that they actually brought that up for a valid point, that the Columbia investigation wasn't solely about the technical fault. It was also it also investigated the organizational failings,
as did the Challenger accident board.
Yep. I'm guessing that the challenge that these are all youngins that weren't around for that. So
all right, fine.
I don't know. Anyway,
no, but I mean, not to take away from your point. Yes, a good investigation looks at not just the technology, but the people and process and culture that led to that situation. Absolutely.
Right. So I, on its surface, I think it has some challenges, but it seems like a good idea, except for a couple of things. This would be similar, I think, in nature to trying to create in the U.S. like the National Car Crash Investigation Board, right? Which, good idea, absolutely great idea. But which of the 10,000 crashes a day would they investigate?
Yeah, exactly. So I get where they're coming from, and I know a decent amount about what the NTSB does. But it's such a different world. And the problem is, it's not that we lack knowledge about what causes these issues. Typically, these issues happen because there was a conscious or unconscious decision about some sort of risk tolerance and some sort of decision of how something was implemented. I really don't feel that these are mysteries. The challenge is, how do we find the balance between being able to get business done and keep things secure? I mean, unless we're talking about investigating O-days, but I'll be honest, I think the manufacturers have a pretty good handle on, wow, somebody got popped with an O-day, let's go figure out what happened and put a patch out. Also, I think when you look at the NTSB and its mandate and its mission, and the way that it interacts with vehicle, rail, and air disasters, most people know it from the air situation, you're dealing with a fairly finite number of compared to general computing, right? I mean, let's say in the U.S. there are probably less than 100 different variants of commercial aircraft flying right now. I'm making that number up, but it's probably like that. If you look at all the Boeing aircraft, all the Airbus aircraft, all the Embraer aircraft, all the Canadian regional jet aircraft, and the other various sundry manufacturers, there's a relatively small amount. So most of the time these days, when they're investigating an accident, it's rarely a systemic technical fault with the airframe or with the aircraft. And if it is, it's fairly quickly fixed. And usually their recommendations, the NTSB has no authority, but they make recommendations to the FAA, and the FAA enforces that if they choose to. But when we try to compare that to general computing, the airlines are so heavily regulated in how they operate. None of that exists in general computing. So you take that sort of mindset and you come back, and I mean, I think they're going to be so flustered because, well, this happened because this company needed to make sure that its executives could access its data anywhere on the road, and the executives didn't want two-factor authentication because that was a hassle. So they used easy to guess passwords. And I mean, they're constantly going to be coming up against cultural challenges that I think, already understand.
Right.
So I don't know. I don't disagree that this is useful to do root cause analysis in a non-political way, but I also think a whole lot of businesses, unless you change liability laws and you started giving them a get out of jail free card for engaging in this process, I don't think most businesses would open their kimono to this.
Yeah, they talk a little bit about that, and maybe tying it to some kind of availability of insurance. So similar in concept to like a flood insurance program if they participated. I think some of the issues, and you started to touch on it a little bit, is the pervasiveness and abundance of different, not only devices but permutations of how the devices are used. Not even talking about again, how do you decide what you're going to go and investigate? I mean, that's a problem unto itself. But one of the concerns I would have is with the NTSB, somebody's flying in their Cessna 172 and they crash, and the NTSB goes and they investigate and they find that, oh geez, there's some bolt that after 20 years of stress weakens and needs to be replaced. And so then, they put out a bulletin and everybody has to go get this bolt replaced. So now the National Cybersecurity Review Board goes off and they find that there's some faulty component or some faulty piece of code in a thing.
Like, let's just pick on WordPress.
Yeah, right. And so by the time they get the report out, that particular thing has been out of service for a year. Like, it's gone.
Likely, maybe, or it's still lingering on routers for the next 20 years.
Well, yeah, but point is, I think in the air, in the aircraft are durable things, and IT technology is not.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in terms of length of service, sure. And I think things change so fast. It's such a dynamic environment in IT that it's really tough. The recommendations, they become so generalized and so watered down because everybody's setup can be different. And unless you're going to start mandating, commonality of environments.
That is the only way I would see this working. To be quite honest, and part of me wonders if we were to fast forward 20 years from now, is that what we'll end up with? I mean, are we, is that a preordained thing just because we're on an unsustainable path?
Well, if we're going to go that route, I would get away from general purpose computing and go to thin clients, or VDIs that rebuild every hour. Mm-hmm. Right? It just move away from the flexibility that causes all these problems.
Sure.
So I could probably, if I thought about this for a while, come up with a whole lot of other examples. And I'm not trying to just shut down this concept. They're such different worlds.
Yeah, I still come back to where would they where would they engage? Would it be the Equifaxes and
Well,
or
you could see some value for that if you go after the mega breaches
yeah,
and then have a non-partisan neutral third party investigate and report on the mega breaches. But they're so wrapped up in lawsuits and other fines and compliance issues. I don't know that you would ever get the openness you would need for them to get a really good factual opinion.
I think it would be very difficult. That's for sure, because everything is going to be shrouded in attorney-client privilege and all that stuff. But at the same time, it just seems intuitive that there might be something there. And I would also say that if we were going to do this, that the review should not focus on the technology as much as on the business process, because the technology changes pretty frequently, and I think the more interesting failures that you would that the society would benefit from is identifying the organizational failures,
Right.
more than the technology failures.
Okay, but let's take that to the next step. We identify the organizational failures, and then the next organization looks at it and goes, "Yeah, but we're different."
I know. I mean, that's the
But we
problem.
have to do it this way because blah blah blah. So I guess I don't think that it's a bad approach to do this sort of rigor. I guess I'm just thinking through it to the end result of a lot of companies going, "Yeah, but that doesn't apply to us,"
Right.
which defeats the purpose. But I think it'd be interesting. I mean, I think it'd be interesting if you could truly build a nonpartisan, non-biased, non-agenda driven, neutral third party with enough expertise to go in and truly dissect with a full knowledge set what caused these breaches. We could learn stuff, but I don't think we'd be that surprised either. I think we often know. I mean, Strutt's vulnerability. We know that about Equifax, right? Now, they could. I imagine a lot more of their findings would be about the culture and the failure of the process. And,
Exactly. Right. Yeah. Why did they not patch it? Why?
Right.
What failed there? And you raise an interesting point. There's not a lot of incentive for compliance or for really taking any action. And in the report, they spend a couple of pages talking about the GDPR, right? And the GDPR is the new European Data Protection Regulation, and it has some pretty significant fines. And so I'm not, they didn't come out and say it, right? But there's probably something there if if you got this really gnarly, weighty fine looming over your head, maybe companies would be more. Because I mean, to be quite honest, companies are kind of lost in the wilderness with what to do in terms of the GDPR, and so this might be an opportunity to drive some some kind of clarity on, okay, well, if you fall under the GDPR, now here's something you have to be aware of. Like you got to have a change management board that does X, to avoid the Equifax style thing. So
Yeah,
anyway,
that's interesting.
it's a very coarse thought, but
No, you have an issue. I think if we're at the end of if we weren't late on a Sunday, I probably would have more coherent, interesting things to say on this. I need to noodle on this one a little while because there's certainly a lot of value that comes from the NTSB. I really struggle with how you apply it to the crazy Wild West world of InfoSec.
Indeed. All right. Well, that is the show for this week, and we should have a normal schedule for a couple of weeks before we, I guess, head off to Bogota, and then who knows what will happen down there. I think we actually will be recording a show, if I'm not mistaken.
That's what I'm told. I think with Martin.
Yeah, that should be pretty cool.
It'd be good to work with a real professional.
Hey now. Anyway, you can find links to the stories we talked about on our website at www.defensivesecurity.org. You can follow the show on Twitter at DefensiveSec. You can follow Mr. Khaled on Twitter at Lurg. You can follow me on Twitter at MaliciousLink. And with that, we will talk again next time.
Thanks. See you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.